Okie dokie dokie. So why isn't everybody on the planet Earth rich? There are almost 3 billion people on the planet Earth whose income is $2 a day or less. There's somewhere between 2.5 and 3 billion people who live on $2 a day or less. And try living on $2 a day. It's not very good. Okay? So are there some poor people, some very poor places on Earth? Well, there's problems, obviously. One problem is population. So if your country, the population of your country is growing too fast, the population of your country is really high, all of a sudden maybe it's very difficult, right? The additional income you're generating is just covering that increase in your population. China seems like a horrible thing, right? They had basically a law that said you can have one child. What happened was many parts of rural China, then they had infanticide. People wanted to have a boy to carry on their family name, and a lot of young female, little female babies just mysteriously disappeared because the family wanted to have a boy. So there were all kinds of social issues. And in fact, if you go to China today, the population that was born when that law was really seriously in effect is far more male than female. And China's labor force is actually shrinking, so they did that on purpose to deal with their population problem and let their economy grow faster they have a very large population, but it's not growing so fast, so when they increase their resources, they don't have to put it into new population. The new pope, has actually talked about the fact that a lot of Catholic countries in the world, their populations are growing too fast, and that be fruitful and multiply doesn't mean be so fruitful that you can't afford to give your family a good life. Okay? So that problem occurs in a number of parts of the world where there's just increase in population that's very quick, and the resources of that country are going to deal with the increase in population. They're not able to make the country's people better off. Okay. Education systems. It turns out that's a classroom in China. Turns out that in large parts of China and other parts of the world, we think it's bad because there's a lot of classrooms in Vegas that have 40 kids in the classroom. Well, the average class size in certain parts of China is over 100 people, over 100 students in the same class. Okay, so this is a picture of a classroom in China. Imagine being the teacher and trying to teach all those students. Okay, it's bad enough in college, right? We know when I get in that classroom and there's 200 of you and there's one of me, that on average you're not going to do as well as if there's 60 of you in that classroom or if there's 20 people in the classroom, right? So even at the college level, we know that class size matters in terms of student learning, and the younger the students are, the more class size matters. In much of the world, there's very, very large class sizes where the teacher can't really effectively deal, or you might have what we used to have in large parts of the United States, which is one-room schoolhouses, which means everybody from K through 12 is basically in the same room, and the teacher's trying to manage 12 different grades all at the same time. Okay, sort of related to that, but down at the bottom is cultural issues. So the primary cultural issue in the world is the treatment of women. There are countries where women are not allowed to go to school past the 6th grade. If you know anything about the Taliban and in Afghanistan, the Taliban don't believe that women should ever basically go to school. And so there was an all-girls school in Afghanistan where the Taliban poisoned every girl in the school. There were 200 girls in the school, and they killed 100 and something girls in that school for going to school. The role of women in the world, Saudi Arabia has only let women drive in the last year and a half. There's a one-woman pilot in Saudi Arabia, and she's the daughter of one of the royal family. You look around the world, and there are countries where it's legal for the husband to kind of beat the wife. and all sorts of it's yeah. So again, the United Nations says the biggest problem in the world, the biggest reason countries don't succeed, is that they don't treat women equally, that they keep women from being part of the economy. And if you take half your population and you exclude them from being part of the economic activity in your country and exclude them from education and exclude them from participation, then clearly you're going to have development problems. There's no country on earth that's gotten rich, except oil countries again, that's done well, that hasn't, and included women. And the United States, we're far from perfect, yes? We're far from perfect. We still haven't had a woman president. You know, the United States Senate is 20% female, maybe in a good year. The House of Representatives around there. We don't elect a lot of women. Women are not CEOs of the Fortune 500. Fewer than 10% of the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies are women. You look at the big gaming companies in Las Vegas, and there aren't women running those companies. Okay? So, cultural issues. And it's not just about women. There are other cultural issues that affect how we do things and what countries do and how they grow or don't grow. But the treatment of women is the biggest cultural issue that countries face. What else? Well, I use that picture down at the bottom to talk about corruption. There are many examples in our history of the world where the United States or some other entity or some other country went to a country and tried to help them and gave them money to do different projects or do different things, and then that money ends up in somebody's Swiss bank account, and that person is all of a sudden rich and they're living on a beach somewhere with the billions of dollars that was supposed to go to help develop that country. So there's a huge problem around the world with corruption in government. And imagine, let's talk about Ivory Coast for a second. So the Ivory Coast is one of the 2 or 3 most important countries in the world because it is the world's largest producer of chocolate. Okay? So, well, all the other countries in Africa were having fights and wars over diamonds. In Ivory Coast, they had a civil war over chocolate. So the government owns the top half of the country and the rebels own the bottom half of the country. Now, if you know anything about chocolate, you have to replant the chocolate trees every 5 years or so because they have a short lifespan where they produce good chocolate. And think about this now. You're Nestle, right? You want to put new chocolate plants in. But if you put them in the government half of the country and the rebels win, the rebels are going to take those away from you. You're going to lose them. If you put new chocolate plants in the rebel half of the country and the government wins, the government's going to take your chocolate plants away from you. So you're not going to invest. And there was a time when people were worried that there was going to be a huge chocolate shortage and that chocolate bars were going to be $10 a piece because there wasn't going to be proper investment in new chocolate. Okay? What happens, and in fact, the French army got in between the two, and so the middle of the country, the French army, because the Ivory Coast used to be a French colony. Everybody there speaks French plus their own native language. And so the French army was in between the two halves, and no investment is happening. You have a problem, okay? What happens then is the government eventually leaves town, and the rebels take over the country, basically, and there can be new investment, and hopefully now we're not going to have a big chocolate shortage. But if the government of the country is unstable, it's going to shut off investment into that country from outside, and now that country is going to have trouble growing. Okay? Related to that sort of is the financial system in a country, and I put this microfinance thing up there. Microfinance thing is a solution, not a problem. If you live in a country in the world where, again, you're one of those 2.7 billion people that live on $2 a day or less, one way out of that problem is to start a business. And you don't need $1 million to start that business. Maybe you need a couple of $100. Maybe you need a couple $100 to buy construction tools, or maybe you need a couple $100 to buy some restaurant equipment or cooking equipment. Maybe you need a couple $100 to buy a sewing machine. You need small amounts of money, not big amounts of money. But the financial systems that countries like the United States try to put in place in other countries tend to be based on our financial system, which means if you're going to start a business, you think about $100,000 or $1 million or hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay? Microfinance is the idea that there should be, in a lot of these countries in the world, there should be the capability to borrow just a few $100s here and there to start a business. Okay, or to fix your house, or to do whatever, but very small loans, microfinance. Okay, microfinance it's a rising issue. It's not available enough in the rest of the world, and somehow we need to make it more available. But the people who might do that tend to still think about $1 million loans, not $100 loans. Okay, so the financial system is set up to support the way we think, or Europeans think, the way a developed country thinks, not to think about what needs to happen for a country to become better off. So the world's full of organizations that try to help countries grow, or are just involved in the financial system. I put the Bank for International Settlements on here. It's only peripherally involved in all this because the BIS is all the central banks in the world work together, and there's an organization of the central banks, and that's called the Bank for International Settlements. It has a lot to do with financing things across the planet Earth and money that's available on the planet Earth. It's not directly giving money to little countries, but they're part of the BIS. The International Monetary Fund loans money to countries all over the world all the time. It loans money even to countries as big as Korea sometimes, but more often to countries like Argentina, or countries in Africa, or smaller countries in Asia. When the country gets into financial trouble, then the International Monetary Fund goes in and works with them, and we're going to talk about how they do that here in a second. The World Bank is an entity that goes around and gives people money to build a port, to build a road. It gives smaller loans, still tens of millions of dollars, but those tens of millions of dollars for specific projects that the country's trying to build. Okay, so if your country is split by a mountain range and you want to build a road across that mountain range to connect the two halves of your country better, or build infrastructure across then the World Bank might help you do that. Okay, and then there's the World Trade Organization, which tries to involve all the countries in the world in trade. But again, Costa Rica, okay? Lots of bananas grown in Costa Rica. Lots and lots and lots of bananas grown in Costa Rica. Del Monte and Dole. And every banana plantation in Costa Rica is owned by a U.S. company. So the profits, the benefit, two arguments here. Okay, when the World Trade Organization has a big meeting, there's protesters. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank, they go off and do something, protests, right? And the reason is, here's the following. Costa Rica again. All the banana plantations in Costa Rica, the profits from those come to the United States. And so instead of that money being reinvested in Costa Rica to make the Costa Ricans better off, it comes to the United States. So people argue, look, this is bad. You're exploiting the people of Costa Rica. The developed countries say, no, we're not. They say, look, those banana plantations wouldn't exist without us. We put all the money in to create those banana plantations. So there's all these jobs in Costa Rica, thousands and thousands of jobs in Costa Rica that wouldn't exist if it weren't for us investing. But we only invest if we can make money back. So we're actually a great job creator in Costa Rica. We're not exploiting Costa Rica. We're creating jobs and creating income and creating wealth in Costa Rica. And we have to be rewarded for doing that, and that means we get to take that money out. So there's these two counter arguments. One is that countries like the United States are exploiting smaller countries. And then the other argument is that the United States and big countries actually are creating jobs in those little countries by investing in rubber plantations or banana plantations or sugar plantations. Okay? So, big argument. You can go out on the web and you can find 100 websites, 99 of which will argue that the United States and other developed countries are evil and they're exploiting the rest of the world. And then the World Trade Organization will say, no, those arguments are in error, and here's why. I didn't make you go do that. If you go take Econ 190, you can go and make that comparison maybe and see what you think about it. Anyway.